The Croshan warship dropped out of hyperspace like a predator emerging from shadows. Commander Vex stood at the center of the bridge, his four arms folded behind his back as he watched the small human vessel drift across the viewing screen. The ship was damaged, leaking atmosphere from 3 separate hull breaches. Its engines were dark. Smoke and debris floated around it like a cloud of defeat. "Status report," Vex demanded, his voice carrying the harsh clicking sounds of his species. "The human ship is completely disabled, Commander," his second officer reported. "Their weapons are offline. Their shields have failed. We are detecting only 37 life signs aboard. They have no means of escape." Vex allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Croshan Empire had been at war with humanity for 6 standard cycles now. In that time, the humans had proven themselves to be stubborn, resourceful, and annoyingly difficult to kill. They had won battles they should have lost. They had survived situations that should have destroyed them. Their small ships had outmaneuvered Croshan destroyers. Their tiny soldiers had held ground against warriors twice their size. But today, Vex had caught one of their ships alone and wounded. "Prepare boarding parties," he ordered. "I want that ship taken intact." His weapons officer hesitated. "Commander, standard protocol suggests we should simply destroy the vessel. Human ships are known to be dangerous even when disabled. There have been reports of explosions, traps, unexpected resistance." "I am aware of the protocols," Vex replied coldly. "But this is a research vessel. Our intelligence suggests it carries valuable scientific data about human colony worlds. The High Council wants that information. They believe it will help us end this war faster." The weapons officer lowered his head in submission. "As you command." Vex watched as his soldiers assembled in the launch bay. 200 Croshan warriors, each standing over 2 meters tall, their bodies covered in hard chitin plates that served as natural armor. They carried plasma rifles and vibroblades. Their eyes gleamed with anticipation. Against 37 wounded humans on a crippled ship, it would barely qualify as a fight. It would be a slaughter. On the human vessel, Captain Sarah Chen stood in what remained of her bridge. Blood ran down the side of her face from a cut on her forehead. The wound was deep, but she ignored the pain. Around her, her surviving crew worked frantically at damaged consoles, trying to restore any system that might help them survive. Sparks flew from broken panels. Emergency lights painted everything in red. "Captain," her first officer said, his voice tight with pain. Lieutenant Marcus Webb had a broken arm that he had strapped to his chest with torn fabric from his uniform. "Croshan boarding shuttles have launched. They will be here in 4 minutes." Sarah looked at her crew. These were scientists, engineers, and a small security detachment. They were not combat specialists. They had been on a simple survey mission when the Croshan warship had ambushed them near the asteroid field. Her ship, the USS Hawking, was a research vessel. It had minimal weapons and light armor. Against a Croshan battlecruiser, they had never stood a chance. The fight had lasted less than 10 minutes. "What systems do we have?" she asked, keeping her voice calm and steady. A captain had to be strong for her crew, even when everything was falling apart. "Life support is holding. Internal communications are functional. We have partial artificial gravity." Webb checked his console, his face grim. "The self-destruct system is still operational." Sarah felt the weight of that statement. Every human ship carried a self-destruct protocol. It was not just a way to prevent enemy capture. It was something more. Something that the other species in the galaxy had never truly understood. Something that made humans different from everyone else. "Not yet," she said quietly. "We do not use that unless we have no other choice." "Captain, we have no other choice. We cannot fight them. We cannot run. There are 200 of them and 37 of us. Half our people are wounded. We have almost no weapons." "We can survive," Sarah said firmly. "As long as we are alive, there is hope. That is what being human means, Lieutenant. We do not give up until we have tried everything." Webb nodded slowly. He had served with the captain for 3 years. He had seen her refuse to surrender in situations that seemed impossible, and somehow she always found a way. He trusted her, even now, even when logic said there was nothing left to trust. "Then what do we do?" he asked. Sarah looked at the approaching shuttles on her screen. They were close now, less than 2 minutes away. "We let them board. We let them think they have won. And then we show them why humans are dangerous, not with weapons, with something else." "What do you mean?" Sarah turned to face her crew. They were all watching her, waiting for guidance, waiting for hope. "I need you all to trust me," she said. "What happens next will be hard, but it is necessary. Do you understand?" They nodded one by one. They did not understand, not really, but they trusted their captain. In the darkness of that moment, trust was all they had left. The Croshan shuttles attached to the Hawking's hull with magnetic clamps. The sound echoed through the ship like thunder. Cutting torches burned through the metal, creating entry points at 3 different locations. The smell of burning steel filled the corridors. Croshan soldiers poured through the openings, their weapons ready, their senses alert for any resistance. They found almost none. The humans had retreated to the inner sections of the ship. A few scattered shots were fired at the boarding parties, but the resistance was weak and disorganized. It was not a real defense. It was barely an inconvenience. Within 20 minutes, the Croshan had secured most of the vessel. Commander Vex boarded the ship himself to oversee the final assault. He walked through the human corridors, noting how small and cramped everything was. Humans were a tiny species, barely reaching the chest of an average Croshan. Their ships reflected their size. The ceilings were low, the passages narrow. It made his soldiers uncomfortable, forcing them to hunch and squeeze through spaces not designed for them. "We have located the bridge," one of his officers reported through the communication system. "The humans have barricaded themselves inside. We are preparing to breach." "Proceed," Vex ordered. "I want their captain alive if possible. The High Council will want to interrogate her." The breach was violent and quick. Croshan soldiers used explosive charges to blow through the reinforced door. The blast shook the walls. Then they flooded into the bridge with overwhelming force. The handful of humans inside were quickly subdued. They did not fight back. They simply surrendered, their hands raised, their faces resigned. Captain Chen was dragged to her feet and brought before Commander Vex. Her hands were bound behind her back. Blood still dripped from the wound on her forehead, but her eyes were clear and focused. He studied her with curiosity. She was small, like all her kind. Her skin was soft and fragile-looking. She had no natural weapons, no armor, nothing that made her a physical threat. And yet she looked at him without fear. There was something in her eyes that made him pause, something he could not quite identify. "You are the commander of this vessel," Vex stated. "Captain Sarah Chen," she replied, her voice steady. "USS Hawking. Your ship belongs to the Croshan Empire now. Your crew are prisoners of war. You will tell us everything you know about human colony locations and defensive capabilities." Sarah said nothing. She simply looked at him with those strange, calm eyes. She did not tremble, she did not beg, she just waited. Vex felt a flicker of annoyance. "You do not seem to understand your situation, human. You have lost. Your ship is ours. Your people are our captives. You have no power here." "Perhaps," Sarah said quietly, "or perhaps you do not understand what you have taken." Vex dismissed her words as bravado. Humans often made bold statements when they were defeated. It was part of their strange psychology. They seemed incapable of accepting reality, even when that reality was standing right in front of them with 4 arms and a plasma rifle. "Take her to the detention area," he ordered. "Begin cataloging everything on the ship. I want a complete inventory of their technology, their research, their weapons, everything." His soldiers dragged Sarah away. Vex turned to examine the bridge. The human technology was primitive compared to Croshan systems, but there might be something useful here. Humans had a reputation for clever innovations that sometimes surprised more advanced species. They made things work in ways that should not be possible. He noticed a small console near the command chair. A red light blinked slowly on its surface, steady and patient. Curious, he approached it and examined the controls. The labels were in the human language, which he could read thanks to his translation implant. Self-destruct system, the label read, status armed, authorization required. Vex smiled. So the humans had considered destroying their own ship rather than letting it be captured, but they had not gone through with it. They had chosen to survive instead. How predictable, how weak, how typically human. He would have his engineers disable the system later. For now, there was work to do. What Commander Vex did not know was that human self-destruct protocols were not what he thought they were. They were not simply bombs designed to destroy a ship. They were something far more dangerous, and Captain Sarah Chen had not failed to activate the protocol. She had already begun something much worse. The detention area was a converted cargo hold that the Croshan had quickly adapted for holding prisoners. Sarah and her crew were placed inside, their hands bound with energy restraints. Guards stood at the entrance, their weapons ready, their eyes watching every movement. Sarah counted her people, 34 survivors. 3 had not made it through the boarding action. She memorized their faces, their names. Lieutenant Park, who had been shot defending engineering. Ensign Williams, who had been crushed when a bulkhead collapsed. Petty Officer Reyes, who had died trying to save others. She would honor them later if she lived long enough. Captain, Webb whispered beside her, his voice barely audible. The system is active. I confirmed it before they took the bridge. Sarah nodded slightly. Then we wait. How long? 26 hours. That is the standard delay. Enough time for rescue if rescue is coming. Enough time for the enemy to think they have won. Webb closed his eyes, processing this information. And if rescue does not come, then the Croshan will learn why every human ship carries that protocol, and why we never, ever let our ships fall into enemy hands intact. Around them, the other prisoners huddled together for warmth and comfort. They were scientists, most of them. Biologists, physicists, astronomers. They had signed up to explore the universe, not to fight a war. But they were human. And humans, when pushed into a corner, had a tendency to become something their enemies never expected. On the Croshan Bridge, Commander Vex was already sending his victory report to the High Council. He had captured a human vessel with minimal losses. He was a hero of the Empire. His name would be remembered. His family would be honored. He had no idea that the clock had already started counting down. 26 hours remained. The first 12 hours passed quietly. The Croshan were methodical in their examination of the Hawking. They cataloged every system, every piece of equipment, every file in the computer banks. They found research data on stellar phenomena, geological surveys of distant moons, biological samples from dozens of alien ecosystems. It was valuable, but not the military intelligence they had hoped for. Commander Vex grew frustrated. "This is a science vessel," he complained to his second officer. "Where are the tactical files, the military communications?" "Perhaps they purged them before capture, Commander." "No, we took the ship too quickly. They did not have time." Vex tapped his claws against the arm of the command chair he had claimed. "There must be hidden files, encrypted databases. Find them." His technicians worked through the night trying to crack the human computer systems. They made progress slowly. Human encryption was surprisingly sophisticated for such a young species, but the Croshan had powerful decryption tools. Eventually, they would break through. In the detention area, Sarah and her crew waited. They talked quietly among themselves, sharing memories, telling stories. Some cried softly in the darkness. Some prayed to gods of a dozen different faiths. Some simply sat in silence, thinking about families they might never see again. Sarah moved among them, offering what comfort she could. She was their captain. Their fate was her responsibility. Every decision she had made had led them to this moment. "Captain," a young ensign said. Her name was Yuki Tanaka and she was barely 20 years old. This was her first deep space assignment. She had been so excited to explore the stars. Now she might never see another sunrise. "Are we going to die here?" Sarah sat down beside her on the cold metal floor. "I do not know," she admitted, "but I know that we will face whatever comes together, as a crew, as humans." "I am scared." "So am I," Sarah said. "Fear is not weakness, Ensign. Fear is what keeps us alive. It is what we do with that fear that defines us." Yuki wiped her eyes with bound hands. "What are we doing with it?" Sarah smiled slightly. "We are waiting, and when the time comes, we will show the Croshan what humans are capable of." The young ensign did not understand what her captain meant, but she trusted her. In the darkness of that makeshift prison, trust was all they had left. 14 hours remained. The Croshan technicians finally broke through the first layer of encryption. What they found made them pause in confusion. "Commander," one of them reported through the communication system, "we have accessed the human files, but they are strange." "Strange how?" Vex demanded. "They contain personal information, letters, images, voice recordings. They appear to be messages from the crew to their families." Vex frowned, his facial plates shifting in puzzlement. Why would they store such things in their computer system? "I do not know, Commander, but there are thousands of them. Every member of the crew has files like this. They appear to have been preparing these messages before the battle." Vex considered this for a moment. Humans were known for their emotional attachments. They formed bonds with each other that seemed excessive to Croshan sensibilities. Perhaps these files were some form of ritual, some way of dealing with the fear of death. "Ignore them," he ordered. "Focus on finding tactical data." But one of his junior officers had already opened one of the files. A holographic image appeared in the air above the console, showing a human child with bright eyes and a wide smile. She was missing her front teeth. She was holding a stuffed animal that looked like a bear. A voice recording played automatically. "Mommy, when are you coming home? I miss you so much. Daddy says you are looking at stars. Can you bring me a star? I want to show it to my friends at school. They would think it is so cool. I love you, Mommy. Come home soon. I made you a picture. It has you and me and Daddy and our dog. We are all happy." The recording ended. The junior officer stared at it, something shifting in his expression. His hand had stopped moving. He just stood there, frozen, looking at the image of the small human child. "Delete it," Vex commanded sharply. "These files are irrelevant to our mission." But the damage was done. Other technicians had opened other files. More images appeared. More voices filled the air. Husbands telling wives they loved them. Parents promising children they would return. Friends sharing jokes and memories. An old man singing a song to his grandson. A woman reciting a poem she had written for her husband. The accumulated hopes and fears and loves of 37 human beings, preserved in digital form. Each file was a window into a life. Each voice was a person with dreams and plans and people waiting for them. Some of the Croshan looked uncomfortable. They shifted their weight. They avoided looking at the screens. They were soldiers, bred for war. They were not supposed to think about their enemies as individuals with families and dreams. But the files made it hard to forget. The files made it impossible to pretend that these humans were just targets. Vex felt his control slipping. "I said delete them, focus on the mission." His crew obeyed, closing the files, shutting down the recordings. But the atmosphere on the bridge had changed. Something was different now. Something they could not quite name. A heaviness had settled over them. A discomfort that had no clear source. What Vex did not know was that these files were not accidents. They were not random personal data left unprotected. They were part of the self-destruct protocol. The first stage had just begun. 8 hours remained. In the detention area, Sarah felt the shift. She could not explain how, but she knew that the first phase was working. She could see it in the faces of the guards. They looked at her crew differently now, not with hatred, with something else, something that might have been doubt. "Captain," Webb asked, noticing her expression. "It has started," she said quietly. "The protocol is designed to work in stages. First, they see who we are, not as enemies, as people." "How does that help us?" "It does not help us escape. That is not what the protocol is for." Sarah's voice was heavy with old knowledge. "The self-destruct protocol is not about destroying the ship, Lieutenant. It is about making sure that no one who captures a human vessel ever forgets what they did. It is about leaving a mark on their souls that will never heal." Webb went pale. "What happens next?" "They learn what we were working on, what we were trying to do, what they destroyed when they attacked us." "Our research." Sarah nodded slowly. "We were studying the Kepler cluster, 300 stars, thousands of planets. We found evidence of life on 47 of them, primitive life mostly, single-celled organisms. But on one world we found something more, complex organisms, the beginnings of intelligence." "I remember. We were going to recommend protection status. We wanted to preserve it." "That data is still in our computers. The Krashen will find it. They will see the images of that alien forest, those strange creatures learning to use tools, building their first shelters. They will understand that we came here not to conquer, not to exploit, but to protect. And then they will realize that by destroying us, they may have doomed that world, because we were the only ones who knew it existed. And now the information will die with us. Those creatures will never have a chance to grow, to develop, to reach the stars, because of what the Krashen did." Webb was silent for a long moment. "That is cruel, Captain." "Yes," Sarah agreed, her voice soft but firm. "It is. The self-destruct protocol was designed to be cruel, not to our enemies' bodies but to their consciences. We cannot defeat the Krashen in battle, but we can make them question whether victory was worth the cost." The young ensign, Yuki, had been listening. "But what if they do not care? What if they are not bothered by these things?" Sarah looked at her with kind eyes. "Then they truly are monsters and nothing we do will matter anyway. But we have to believe that even our enemies have some capacity for empathy. Otherwise, what are we fighting for?" 4 hours remained. Commander Vex stood on the captured bridge, staring at the holographic display his technicians had assembled. It showed a blue-green world orbiting a distant star. The surface was covered in forests of purple vegetation, vast and ancient and strange. Rivers wound through the trees like silver ribbons. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks hidden in clouds. And in those forests, strange creatures moved. They walked on 2 legs like humans. They had 4 arms like Krashen. They used crude tools made of stone and wood. They built primitive structures from branches and leaves. They gathered around fires and made sounds that might have been communication. "What is this?" Vex demanded. "It appears to be alien life, Commander. Non-sentient, but showing signs of developing intelligence. The humans were studying it." "Why?" The technician hesitated, checking his notes. "Their records indicate they wanted to protect it. They believed that in a few thousand years, this species might develop full sentience. They wanted to ensure that no one interfered with their natural evolution. They were going to recommend that this world be declared off-limits to all spacefaring civilizations." Vex stared at the images. The creatures were primitive, barely more than animals, but there was something in their eyes, something that reminded him of his own children when they were young, that spark of curiosity, that desire to understand, that potential for something greater. "Where is this world?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. "The coordinates are in the database. It is in unclaimed space, Commander. No empire has any interest in that region. Until now. The technician did not respond. They both knew what would happen. This information would go to the High Council. They would send ships. They would claim the world. They would use it as they saw fit. And those creatures in the purple forest would never have a chance to become what they might have been. Vex felt something he had not felt in many cycles, something uncomfortable, something that felt almost like doubt, almost like guilt, almost like shame. He pushed it away. "Continue the inventory," he ordered, "and remove those images from the display. They are irrelevant to our mission." But even as he gave the command, he knew those images would stay in his mind. They were already becoming part of him, whether he wanted them or not. 2 hours remained. The next layer of files contained the research logs, video recordings of the scientists at work. Dr. Martinez, the biologist, explaining with obvious excitement how the creatures on that distant world were developing the ability to count. Dr. Kim, the linguist, demonstrating the complex sounds the creatures made, sounds that might one day become language. Dr. Singh, the anthropologist, showing footage of the creatures burying their dead, placing flowers on the graves, making sounds of mourning. "They care for each other," Singh said in the recording. "They feel grief. They understand loss. In another 10,000 years they might be building cities. In 1,000,000 years they might be reaching for the stars. We are witnessing the birth of a civilization." Vex watched these recordings without expression, but something was changing inside him. Something was breaking. He told himself it did not matter. These were just animals on a distant planet. The Croshan had no obligation to protect them. The humans had been fools to care about such things. It was weakness, sentiment, emotion without purpose. But the doubt remained, and it was growing. 1 hour remained. Sarah Chen sat in the darkness, waiting. The clock in her head counted down with each heartbeat. She knew what was coming. She had known from the moment she received command of her first ship and learned about the true nature of the self-destruct protocol. It had been designed by a psychologist, not an engineer, a woman named Dr. Alina Volkov, who had studied alien species for 50 years. She had understood something that most humans did not want to admit. In a war against larger, stronger, more numerous enemies, humanity could not win through force alone. But they could win in other ways. The self-destruct protocol was a weapon aimed at the mind. It forced the enemy to see their victims as people. It made them confront the consequences of their actions. It planted seeds of guilt and regret that would grow over time, spreading through their societies, weakening their resolve. It was, in many ways, the cruelest weapon humanity had ever created, because it did not kill bodies. It wounded something far deeper. The final hour began. On the Croshan Bridge, alarms suddenly blared. Red lights flashed. Warning messages scrolled across every screen. Commander Vex jumped to his feet. "What is happening?" "Commander, the human ship's reactor is destabilizing. Containment fields are failing." "How is that possible? We secured the engineering section hours ago." "I do not know, Commander. The reactor was stable an hour ago. Something has changed in the last few minutes." Vex felt cold fear wash over him. "Evacuate the ship. Get our people out now." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was too late. The reactor was not just failing. It was doing something else. The containment fields were collapsing in a specific pattern, a pattern that would maximize the damage not just to the ship, but to anything nearby. It was deliberate. It was planned. "Commander, the humans, they are still on board." Vex hesitated for just a moment. The human prisoners, Captain Chen and her crew, they were still in the detention area. If the ship exploded, they would die too. He made a choice. "Leave them," he said, his voice cold and hard. "They are enemy combatants. Our priority is our own people." The evacuation was chaos. Croshan soldiers scrambled for shuttles, for escape pods, for any way off the dying ship. Some made it. Many did not. 43 Croshan warriors were still aboard when the reactor reached critical levels. In the detention area, Sarah Chen stood calmly as the ship began to shake around her. Alarms screamed. Emergency lights flickered. The walls groaned under the stress. Her crew gathered close, holding hands, speaking words of comfort to each other. "Captain," Webb said quietly, his voice steady, "is this how it ends?" Sarah looked at her people, her friends, her family, the scientists who had only wanted to explore, the engineers who had only wanted to build, the young ensign who had only wanted to see the stars. "Yes," she said, "but not just for us." The reactor breached. The explosion was visible from the Croshan warship, now hanging several kilometers away. A brilliant flash of light, then silence. The USS Hawking ceased to exist in a single instant. Debris scattered across the void. Fire burned briefly before the vacuum smothered it, and then there was nothing. Commander Vex watched from the observation deck of his own vessel. His face was blank, but his mind was churning. He had lost 43 soldiers in the evacuation. Good warriors, taken by a ship he had thought was completely under his control. And the humans, all 34 of them, gone. "Commander," his second officer said quietly, "the High Council is requesting a report." Vex did not respond immediately. He was still seeing images in his mind. A child asking for a star, purple forests on a distant world, Captain Chen's calm eyes looking at him without fear, Dr. Martinez explaining about the creatures who were learning to count, the old man singing to his grandson. He had won the battle. He had captured the human ship just as he had planned. But somehow, standing here among the debris, he did not feel like a victor. "Commander." "I will make my report," Vex said finally. "Tell the High Council that the human vessel was destroyed due to an unforeseen reactor failure. All captured intelligence was lost in the explosion." "Sir, but we transmitted some of the data before the destruction. The files about the alien life forms, the crew personal records, the research logs." "Delete them." "Commander." Vex turned to face his officer. His eyes were hard, but something behind them was broken. "I said delete them, all of them. This never happened. We encountered a human vessel. We engaged. It was destroyed. That is all." The officer stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "As you command." Vex turned back to the viewport. The debris was already dispersing, carried away by the solar winds. Soon, there would be nothing left to show that the Hawking had ever existed. But Commander Vex knew that was not true. Something remained, something that no explosion could destroy. The humans had left something inside him, something that would grow, something that would change him in ways he could not yet understand. And across the galaxy, on 1,000 other ships, in 1,000 other encounters, the same seeds were being planted. Human crews facing capture, activating protocols that their enemies did not understand, leaving behind not just debris but memories, ghosts, questions that would haunt the dreams of those who killed them. It was not a weapon that could win a war in a day, but over years, over decades, it would do something far more powerful. It would make the enemy question whether the war was worth fighting at all. This was humanity's true self-destruct protocol, not the destruction of their ships, the destruction of their enemies' certainty. And it was working. 3 months later, Commander Vex resigned his commission. He told the High Council that he was tired, that he wanted to spend time with his family. They did not believe him, but they did not question him either. He was a hero of the Empire, after all. He had served with distinction. He had earned his rest. He moved to a quiet world on the edge of Croshan space. He built a small home overlooking the sea. He spent his days watching the waves roll in, thinking about the choices he had made, the lives he had taken, the futures he had ended. His wife worried about him. She said he had changed. He was quieter now, more thoughtful. He spent too much time alone. He did not laugh anymore. She did not know about the data chip. Sometimes, late at night, when his family was asleep, he would pull it out from its hiding place. It contained a single file that he had kept against his own orders, a recording of a human child asking for a star. He never showed it to anyone, but he listened to it again and again as the years passed. He heard her voice, her innocent joy, her simple love, and he wondered what she had done when she learned that her mother was never coming home. He never commanded another ship. And somewhere in the vast silence of space, the ghost of Captain Sarah Chen smiled. The war continued for another 15 years, but slowly, imperceptibly, something began to change. Krashen commanders became reluctant to take human ships intact. They preferred to destroy them from a distance, quickly and cleanly, rather than face what waited inside. Stories spread through the Krashen military. Stories about human self-destruct protocols, about what happened to those who triggered them, about the nightmares that never went away, about commanders who resigned and soldiers who could not sleep and crews who lost the will to fight. Some called it superstition, others called it psychological warfare, but whatever name they gave it, the effect was real. Human ships became feared not for their weapons, but for what they carried inside. The memories, the voices, the faces of the fallen. To capture a human ship was to invite those ghosts aboard your own vessel. To look into their files was to look into a mirror and see something you did not want to see. And as the fear grew, so did the whispers. Whispers that maybe, just maybe, this war was not worth the cost. That some victories were worse than defeat. That the humans, small and fragile and strange, had found a way to fight that could not be countered with weapons. The Krashen High Council debated these concerns in secret sessions. Military reports showed declining morale. Recruitment numbers were falling. Veterans were refusing to re-enlist. Something was wrong with their warriors and no one knew how to fix it. They tried everything: psychological conditioning, memory suppression, chemical treatments. Nothing worked. The ghosts of human ships could not be erased from the minds they had touched. 20 years after the destruction of the USS Hawking, the Krashen High Council voted to pursue peace negotiations. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The war had become too expensive, they said. The military was suffering from morale problems, they admitted. It was time to end it. The truth was simpler. The Krashen had lost the will to fight. Humanity accepted the offer. At the signing ceremony, a human diplomat named Admiral James Chen placed a small object on the negotiating table. It was a photograph, worn and faded, showing a woman in a captain's uniform standing on the bridge of her ship. She was smiling. Her eyes were full of hope and determination. "My sister," he said quietly, "USS Hawking. She gave everything she had to make this day possible." The Krashen delegates looked at the photograph. Some of them looked away quickly, unable to meet the eyes of the woman in the image. Others stared for a long time, something shifting in their expressions. One of them, an elderly female who had served on the High Council for many years, reached out and touched the photograph gently. "She was brave," the counselor said. "They all were." No one spoke about the self-destruct protocol. No one needed to. The treaty was signed that afternoon. The war was over. And across the galaxy, in memorial halls and private homes, in databases and fading memories, the crew of the USS Hawking watched over the peace they had helped to create. They were gone, but they were not forgotten. They never would be. Years later, a young Krashen student named Thex was researching ancient history when he came across a reference to the human self-destruct protocols. Curious, he dug deeper into the archives. He found fragments of deleted files, recovered logs, testimonies from veterans who had finally found the courage to speak. What he found changed his life. He learned about the Hawking and its crew. He read about Captain Sarah Chen and her final hours. He discovered the truth about what the protocol was designed to do and why it had been so devastatingly effective. But what struck him most was a single line from an old human text, written by the psychologist who had designed the protocol. Dr. Elena Volkov had written, "We cannot make our enemies stop fighting, but we can make them remember why they should." Thex became a historian. He spent his career documenting the war between humans and Croshan, trying to understand how two species had gone from enemies to allies. He wrote books and gave lectures and trained a generation of scholars. His work was controversial at first. Many Croshan did not want to remember those dark years. They wanted to forget, to move on, to pretend it had never happened. But Thex insisted on the truth, because only by understanding the past could they build a better future. And in every classroom, on every world, he told the story of the USS Hawking. Not as a tale of destruction, but as a lesson in hope. Not as a weapon, but as a mirror. Not as an ending, but as a beginning. Because humanity had understood something that the galaxy was still learning. The most powerful weapon was not the one that killed the most enemies. It was the one that changed the most minds. And that weapon, once unleashed, could never be destroyed. On the anniversary of the treaty signing, humans and Croshan gather together in remembrance. They light candles and speak names and share stories of those who did not live to see the peace. The ceremony is held on a neutral world, chosen for its beauty and tranquility. Flowers bloom in gardens that were planted by both species together. The ceremony always ends the same way. A recording plays, collected from hundreds of human ships lost during the war. Voices of the fallen, speaking to families they would never see again. "I love you," the voices say. "Remember me, live well, be kind. Make the universe better than you found it." Some Croshan weep when they hear these words. They are not ashamed of their tears. They have learned that emotion is not weakness. It is connection. It is empathy. It is what makes life worth living. Some humans hold hands with former enemies who have become friends. They look at each other and see not aliens but partners, not strangers but family. And somewhere, in the quantum foam of space itself, in the places where energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed, the spirits of the Hawking crew watch over them all. Captain Sarah Chen had believed that even enemies had the capacity for empathy. She had been right. And because of that belief, two species who had tried to destroy each other now stood together, building something new, something better, something that neither could have achieved alone. That was the true legacy of the self-destruct protocol. Not destruction. Redemption. On the world in the Kepler cluster, the creatures in the purple forest continue to grow and learn. They have begun to farm now. They have developed writing. They tell stories around their fires about the lights in the sky, the stars that watch over them. They do not know that they were almost lost. They do not know about the ship that found them, the humans who wanted to protect them, the war that could have ended their dreams before they began. But the Croshan know, and they have made a choice. The world has been declared protected space. No ship may approach within 10 light years. No civilization may interfere with the natural development of its inhabitants. The creatures will be allowed to grow in their own time, at their own pace, until one day they reach the stars themselves. It is a small thing, perhaps, a single world among billions, but it matters. Because it proves that the sacrifice of the Hawking crew was not in vain, that their deaths led to life, that their ending became a beginning for others. This is what Captain Sarah Chen would have wanted. This is what it means to be human. This is why human ships carry self-destruct protocols, not to prevent technology from falling into enemy hands, not to deny resources to the conqueror, but to ensure that no one who takes a human life ever forgets the cost. To plant seeds of conscience in the hearts of enemies. To transform defeat into something greater than victory. Because humanity learned long ago that wars are not won by killing bodies. They are won by changing souls. And in that battlefield, humans have no equal. This is why, even now, centuries after the war ended, alien species approach human vessels with caution and respect, not because they fear human weapons, not because they fear human technology, but because they fear what they might become if they ever had to look inside one. Humanity, it turns out, discovered the ultimate defense, the enemy's own conscience, and that is something no weapon can ever destroy. The universe is vast and dark and full of dangers. Species rise and fall. Empires grow and crumble. Wars begin and end and begin again. But some things endure. Love endures. Memory endures. The voices of those who came before, speaking across the void, reminding us of who we are and who we might become. And in the end, that is what the self-destruct protocol was always about. Not ending stories, but making sure they are never forgotten. The crew of the USS Hawking are gone now. Their bodies are stardust, scattered across the cosmos, but their spirits live on in every treaty signed, every war ended, every life saved by the peace they helped to create. They are heroes, not because they killed their enemies, but because they made their enemies want to be better. That is the greatest victory of all. And it belongs to humanity. Forever.